The sun was shining brightly over London, casting golden rays on the historic streets filled with tourists eager to soak in the city's charm. Among them was Alex, a young traveler from another country, who had dreamed of visiting the iconic Buckingham Palace for as long as he could remember. With wide eyes and a camera slung around his neck, Alex stepped out of the taxi, feeling the buzz of excitement that only comes with exploring something completely new. Buckingham Palace stood majestically before him, its grand architecture making it look like something straight out of a storybook. The gates were adorned with intricate designs, and the sprawling gardens surrounding the palace added to its regal aura. But what caught Alex's attention immediately were the royal guards standing outside. Tall, imposing figures dressed in their unmistakable red tunics and towering bearskin hats. They looked almost too perfect to be real, like statues carved by master artists. Alex couldn't help but stare at them. Their posture was impeccable, their expressions unreadable, and not even the slightest movement betrayed their presence. It was hard to believe they were actual people beneath those uniforms. Curious, Alex moved closer, snapping photos and marveling at how still they remained despite the noisy crowd gathering around them. Some tourists tried to get their attention by waving or making funny faces, but the guards didn't flinch. They were professionals, committed to their duty no matter what. As Alex observed them, he noticed the ceremonial swords hanging neatly on their belts. The blades gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting tiny sparks that danced across the metal surface. He'd seen pictures of these swords online, but seeing one up close made him realize just how impressive they were. Each sword seemed to carry centuries of history within it, symbolizing tradition, honor, and discipline. For a moment, Alex felt a deep sense of respect for the guards and the role they played in protecting such an important landmark. But then something shifted inside him. A thought crept into his mind. A reckless idea sparked by countless videos he'd seen on social media where people dared to do outrageous things for likes and shares. What if he could pull off a stunt here? Something bold enough to make headlines back home. His heart began to race as the idea took shape. What if he reached out and touched one of those swords? Just a quick grab, nothing serious. Surely, the guard wouldn't react too harshly in front of all these people, right? The more Alex thought about it, the more tempting it became. He imagined himself telling the story later, laughing about how close he'd come to getting into trouble. Maybe his friends would think it was hilarious. Maybe it would even make him famous online. The thrill of doing something daring clouded his judgment, and soon, all thoughts of respect and responsibility vanished from his mind. Without realizing it, Alex had already taken a few steps closer to the nearest guard. His pulse quickened as he scanned the area, checking if anyone was paying attention to him specifically. Most of the crowd was busy taking selfies or chatting among themselves, completely unaware of the dangerous game Alex was about to play. Little did he know, this seemingly harmless prank would spiral into something far more serious than he ever anticipated. As Alex stood there, his mind racing with the reckless idea he'd just conjured up, a strange mix of excitement and nervousness washed over him. He glanced around once more, trying to gauge whether anyone in the crowd might notice what he was about to do. The tourists nearby were busy snapping photos, laughing with their friends, or admiring the palace's grandeur. No one seemed to be paying attention to him specifically. This gave Alex a false sense of confidence, convincing him that he could pull off his stunt without drawing too much scrutiny. He began to rationalize his plan further, telling himself it was all in good fun. After all, how serious could it really be? It wasn't like he was planning to hurt anyone or cause any real harm. He just wanted to touch the sword, a small act of mischief that would give him something exciting to talk about later. People do crazier things on social media, he thought to himself, recalling videos he'd seen of others pulling stunts in public places for likes and shares. Maybe this would even make him go viral. The idea of being the center of attention online fueled his determination, pushing aside any lingering doubts. But deep down, a small voice whispered warnings. A part of him knew this wasn't just some harmless prank. These guards weren't ordinary people. They represented centuries of tradition, discipline, and national pride. Their presence outside Buckingham Palace wasn't decorative. It was symbolic. They were protectors, standing firm as living embodiments of history and duty. Yet, Alex chose to ignore that voice, dismissing it as unnecessary fear. He convinced himself that the guards probably dealt with curious tourists all the time and wouldn't take his actions too seriously. With each passing second, Alex grew bolder. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, pretending to adjust his camera strap while inching closer to the guard stationed nearest to him. His heart pounded loudly in his chest, but he told himself it was just adrenaline. The same kind athletes felt before a big game or performers experience before stepping onto a stage. "You've got this," he muttered under his breath, almost as if trying to psych himself up for what he was about to attempt. The guard, meanwhile, remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable behind the shadow of his towering bearskin hat. To Alex, it almost felt like the guard wasn't human at all, more like a statue carved out of stone. This only emboldened him further. If the guard didn't react to all the noise and commotion around him, surely he wouldn't care about someone brushing against his sword, right? Alex clung to this flawed logic, refusing to consider the possibility that his actions might carry consequences far beyond embarrassment. As he moved into position, Alex's mind played through the scenario again and again. He imagined reaching out quickly, grabbing the hilt of the sword, and pulling back before anyone could stop him. Then he'd flash a cheeky grin, maybe even pose for a photo, and walk away unscathed. In his head, it all seemed so simple, almost harmless. But reality rarely aligns with imagination, and Alex was about to discover just how wrong he was. Unbeknownst to him, the guard's stoic demeanor wasn't a sign of indifference. It was the calm before the storm. What Alex failed to realize was that beneath the red tunic and polished boots lay years of rigorous training and unwavering dedication to duty. The guards weren't just there to look impressive. They were prepared for anything. And while Alex saw this as a lighthearted prank, the guard, and everyone else involved, would see it very differently. Every step Alex took toward the sword brought him closer to crossing a line he couldn't uncross, setting the stage for an encounter that would leave him shaken and humbled. Little did Alex know, his impulsive decision was about to teach him a lesson he'd never forget, one that went far beyond the boundaries of respect, responsibility, and the importance of thinking twice before acting on a reckless impulse. Alex's heart was pounding so loudly, he was sure everyone around him could hear it. His palms were sweaty, and his breath came in short, shallow bursts as he took one final step closer to the guard. The crowd seemed oblivious to the tension building inside him, their laughter and chatter blending into a distant hum. All Alex could focus on was the gleaming sword hanging neatly at the guard's side. It looked almost within reach now, its polished surface catching the sunlight like a beacon daring him to act. Summoning every ounce of courage, or perhaps recklessness, he had, Alex made his move. Pretending to adjust his camera again, he leaned forward casually, trying to appear nonchalant. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, his hand darted toward the sword. His fingers brushed against the cold metal hilt for just a fraction of a second before he realized something was wrong. Terribly wrong. What happened next felt like slow motion. The guard, who had been standing as still as a statue only moments ago, sprang into action with a precision that left Alex stunned. There was no shout, no angry glare, just an instant transformation from immovable figure to calculated force. In one fluid motion, the guard stepped back slightly, unsheathed the sword, and held it firmly in front of him. The metallic ring of the blade sliding out of its scabbard echoed sharply through the air, silencing the nearby chatter like a clap of thunder. For a moment, Alex froze, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Had the guard really drawn his sword? Was this part of some rehearsed performance meant to entertain tourists? But as Alex locked eyes with the guard, any lingering doubt vanished. The guard's expression hadn't changed. He still wore the same stoic mask, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his stance. Every line of his body radiated authority, and the way he held the sword suggested he was more than ready to use it if necessary. The crowd erupted into gasps and murmurs. Tourists who had been busy taking selfies suddenly turned their attention to the unfolding scene. Phones were whipped out faster than Alex could blink, capturing the surreal moment from every angle. Some people whispered nervously, while others simply stared in disbelief. A few even backed away instinctively, sensing that this was no longer a safe space for casual sightseeing. Alex's bravado crumbled under the weight of the situation. He had expected. Well, he wasn't entirely sure what he'd expected. Maybe a stern look or a firm command to step back. Perhaps a brief scolding followed by laughter when the guard realized it was all just a harmless joke. But this icy, calculated response was nothing like anything he'd imagined. For the first time since arriving at Buckingham Palace, Alex felt truly afraid. He stood rooted to the spot, his hand still hovering awkwardly in midair where the sword had been just seconds earlier. His brain screamed at him to move, to apologize, to retreat, to do anything. But his legs refused to cooperate. Instead, he remained frozen, locked in place by the piercing gaze of the guard and the undeniable gravity of what he'd just done. Meanwhile, the atmosphere around them shifted dramatically. What had started as a cheerful, carefree day at the palace quickly morphed into something tense and unpredictable. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering warnings to stay away from the commotion. Other guards stationed nearby began to take notice, their heads turning ever so slightly toward the disturbance. One of them reached for the radio clipped to his uniform, likely calling for backup. As the reality of the situation sank in, Alex's initial excitement gave way to sheer panic. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't thought about how his actions might escalate or what kind of reaction they would provoke. All he'd wanted was a fleeting moment of thrill, a story to tell his friends back home. Now, surrounded by wide-eyed onlookers and facing the sharp edge of a ceremonial sword, Alex realized just how badly things had gone awry. And yet, the guard hadn't said a word. Not a single syllable had passed his lips, but his message was clear. This was not a game. This was not something to be taken lightly. With every passing second, Alex understood more and more that he had crossed a line, one that couldn't easily be uncrossed. The guard's icy response sent a chill down Alex's spine. Though the day was warm and sunny, the sword in the guard's hand wasn't just a prop anymore. It felt alive, charged with purpose and authority. Every inch of its polished blade seemed to gleam with warning, as if daring Alex to make another move. But Alex didn't dare. He stood frozen, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. What struck Alex most was not the sword itself, but the guard's demeanor. There was no anger, no raised voice, no dramatic gestures, just an unshakable calm that somehow made the situation even more intimidating. The guard's face remained expressionless, almost mechanical, yet his eyes betrayed a quiet intensity. They were sharp and focused, locked onto Alex like a hawk watching its prey. It was clear that this wasn't personal. It was professional. The guard wasn't reacting out of emotion. He was following protocol, executing his duty with precision. For a moment, Alex wondered if he should speak up, maybe stammer out an apology or try to explain himself. But something stopped him. Something about the guard's posture, the way he held the sword steady, his feet planted firmly on the ground, made it clear that words wouldn't be enough. This wasn't the kind of situation where a quick "I'm sorry" could fix things. Alex had crossed a boundary, and now he would have to face the consequences. The crowd around them grew quieter, their whispers fading into an uneasy silence. Some tourists looked shocked, while others seemed fascinated, their phones still recording every detail. A few people began to back away slowly, sensing that the scene might escalate further. Parents shielded their children, pulling them closer and whispering explanations about why they needed to stay calm. Even the other guards nearby had shifted slightly, their bodies tensing as they prepared for whatever might happen next. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. Then, without saying a word, the guard took one deliberate step forward. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't passive either. It was a calculated movement meant to send a message. "You've gone too far." Alex instinctively stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. His heart raced faster than ever before, each beat echoing in his ears like a drum roll. He wanted to run, to disappear into the crowd, but his legs felt like lead weights holding him in place. All he could do was watch as the guard maintained his position, the sword still poised between them. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every second felt like an eternity, filled with tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Finally, reinforcements arrived. 2 additional guards approached swiftly but calmly, their movements synchronized as if choreographed. They flanked Alex, forming a tight circle that left no room for escape. Their presence added another layer of intimidation, making it painfully obvious that this was no longer a private matter. It was official business now. The original guard sheathed his sword with a smooth motion, signaling that immediate danger had passed. But the relief Alex might have felt was short-lived. The other guards stepped in, their expressions equally unreadable. One of them gestured firmly for Alex to follow them, leaving no room for argument. For a brief moment, Alex considered resisting, hoping against hope that this was all some elaborate misunderstanding. But deep down, he knew better. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. As Alex walked alongside the guards toward the edge of the palace grounds, escorted like a prisoner caught red-handed, he glanced back at the crowd. Dozens of eyes were fixed on him, some curious, others judgmental. Phones continued to record, capturing his humiliation for the world to see. He felt a wave of shame wash over him, hotter than the summer sun beating down on his skin. What had started as a reckless prank had spiraled into something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. And as the guards led him away, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of what promised to be a very long and difficult day. In that moment, surrounded by stoic guards and a sea of onlookers, Alex finally understood the weight of his actions. Stealing a royal guard's sword wasn't just a silly stunt. It was a violation of respect, tradition, and trust. And the icy, unpredictable response he received was a stark reminder that some lines simply shouldn't be crossed. As the guards escorted Alex away from the crowd, his mind raced with a mix of panic and regret. The once cheerful atmosphere of Buckingham Palace had transformed into something heavy and suffocating. Every step he took felt like walking through quicksand, slow, deliberate, and utterly inescapable. The guards flanking him said nothing, their silence amplifying the tension. Their polished boots clicked against the pavement with mechanical precision, each sound echoing in Alex's ears like a countdown to something inevitable. The group stopped near a small security outpost tucked discreetly along the edge of the palace grounds. One of the guards opened a door and gestured for Alex to enter. His heart sank as he stepped inside, realizing this wasn't going to end with a simple scolding or a slap on the wrist. Inside, 2 more uniformed officers were waiting, their expressions stern but composed. They motioned for Alex to sit at a plain wooden table, and without hesitation, they began questioning him. "Do you understand what you've done?" one officer asked, his tone calm but firm. Alex nodded weakly, unable to meet their eyes. He wanted to explain himself, to tell them it had all been a stupid mistake, a momentary lapse of judgment, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he justify something so reckless? Instead, he sat there quietly, shoulders slumped, feeling smaller than he ever had before. The officers didn't raise their voices or lose their tempers. If anything, their composure made the situation even worse. They explained, in clear and measured terms, why Alex's actions were unacceptable. The royal guards weren't just symbols of tradition. They represented centuries of discipline, loyalty, and service to the crown. Tampering with their equipment, or attempting to, was not only disrespectful, but also a breach of security protocols. These aren't props, one officer emphasized, pointing to a photo of a ceremonial sword hanging on the wall. They're tools meant to protect. As the gravity of his actions sank in, Alex began to feel a deep sense of shame. He thought about the tourists who had witnessed the entire ordeal, their shocked faces, their phones recording every second. This wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It was a public spectacle that would likely spread online within minutes. Social media, which had inspired his ill-fated prank in the first place, was now poised to amplify his humiliation on a global scale. But the consequences didn't stop there. After finishing their initial assessment, the officers informed Alex that the matter would be handed over to local law enforcement. Within moments, police officers arrived at the outpost, ready to take over the investigation. As they led Alex to a patrol car parked nearby, flashes of cameras went off in the background. Reporters, alerted by the commotion, had already gathered outside the palace gates, shouting questions and snapping photos. Alex kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, but he could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him. At the police station, things became even more serious. Officers questioned Alex extensively, asking him to recount every detail of the incident. At first, he tried to downplay it, insisting it had been a harmless joke gone wrong. But the detectives weren't convinced. They showed him footage captured by tourists, highlighting how close he'd come to escalating the situation further. "You don't realize how unpredictable these moments can be," one officer said gravely. "Had the guard reacted differently, someone could have gotten hurt, including you." By the time the interrogation ended, Alex was emotionally drained. He realized now that his actions hadn't just disrespected the guards, they had jeopardized safety and disrupted the peace of an iconic landmark. For the first time, he understood the broader implications of his behavior. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the values and traditions he carelessly mocked. Before leaving the station, Alex was given a formal warning and told that any repeat offenses would result in severe legal consequences. He left with a heavy heart, knowing that this experience would haunt him for a long time. Outside, reporters continued to hound him, eager for a statement. But Alex ignored them, keeping his head low as he climbed into a taxi. As the vehicle pulled away, he stared out the window, replaying the day's events in his mind. What had started as a fleeting attempt at fun had spiraled into chaos. And now, everyone knew his name for all the wrong reasons. Back at his hotel later that evening, Alex sat alone on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the floor. The weight of the day's events pressed down on him like a ton of bricks. He replayed every moment. The gleam of the sword, the guard's icy response, the murmurs of the crowd, and the stern voices of the officers, over and over in his mind. Each memory brought a fresh wave of shame and regret. What had seemed like a harmless prank just hours ago now felt like one of the biggest mistakes of his life. As night fell, Alex opened his laptop and began typing. At first, the words came slowly, hesitant, and fragmented. But as he poured his thoughts onto the screen, they flowed more freely. He wrote a heartfelt letter addressed to Buckingham Palace, apologizing for his actions and acknowledging the gravity of what he'd done. "I never intended to disrespect the guards or the traditions they represent," he typed, his fingers trembling slightly. "But I see now how reckless and selfish my behavior was. I deeply regret my actions and hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me." In the letter, Alex didn't make excuses or try to justify himself. Instead, he took full responsibility, explaining that his decision had been driven by impulsiveness and a misguided desire for attention. He expressed admiration for the discipline and dedication of the royal guards, admitting that he had failed to appreciate their role until it was too late. By the time he finished writing, tears were streaming down his face. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully confront the magnitude of his mistake. The next morning, Alex sent the letter to the palace and posted a shorter version online, hoping to reach a wider audience. To his surprise, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. While some people criticized his initial actions, many others praised his willingness to own up to his mistake and apologize sincerely. Messages poured in from strangers around the world, sharing stories of their own moments of poor judgment and offering words of encouragement. One comment stood out: "We all mess up sometimes. What matters is how we learn and grow from it." Determined to turn this experience into something positive, Alex decided to speak publicly about what had happened. Back home, he reached out to local schools and travel organizations, volunteering to give talks about responsible tourism and cultural sensitivity. During these presentations, he shared his story openly, using humor and honesty to connect with his audience. He emphasized the importance of respecting local customs and traditions when traveling, urging others not to let curiosity or thrill-seeking override common sense. "I thought I was being clever," Alex often said during these talks, "but I ended up looking foolish. And worse, I disrespected something truly special. Don't make the same mistake I did." His candidness resonated with listeners, especially young travelers who could relate to the temptation of seeking adventure without considering the consequences. Over time, Alex noticed a shift, not just in how people responded to him, but also within himself. Writing the letter and speaking publicly forced him to reflect deeply on his values and priorities. He realized that true courage wasn't about taking risks for fleeting validation. It was about owning up to your mistakes and striving to be better. This newfound perspective changed the way he approached life, making him more mindful and empathetic. Though Alex never returned to Buckingham Palace, the lessons he learned stayed with him forever. Every time he saw images of the royal guards standing tall and proud, he felt a pang of guilt, but also gratitude. Gratitude for the chance to grow, to understand, and to become someone who could inspire others to think twice before acting recklessly. Little did he know, this incident would shape not only his future, but also the way countless others viewed the importance of respect and responsibility while exploring new places. Months turned into years, but Alex never forgot the day he tried to grab a royal guard's sword. It became a defining moment in his life, a turning point that shaped everything he did afterward. Determined to make amends and ensure no one else made the same mistake, Alex threw himself into advocacy work. He began traveling to schools, community centers, and travel expos, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. His talks weren't just about what happened at Buckingham Palace. They were lessons wrapped in vulnerability and humor, designed to inspire people to think before acting impulsively. At first, stepping onto a stage to recount such an embarrassing incident felt terrifying. Alex worried that audiences would judge him harshly or dismiss his message because of his past actions. But as soon as he started speaking, honestly, and without sugarcoating anything, he noticed something remarkable. People connected with him. They laughed when he described how ridiculous his plan had been, cringed when he talked about the guard unsheathing the sword, and nodded thoughtfully when he explained the importance of respecting cultural symbols. One of the most impactful parts of his presentation was a short video clip he included, a montage of tourists behaving recklessly at famous landmarks around the world. Some were climbing statues, others were ignoring signs, and a few even mimicked dangerous stunts for social media likes. After showing the clip, Alex would pause and ask, "Why do we feel entitled to break rules just for a photo or a laugh? What are we really gaining?" The room would fall silent as attendees reflected on their own behaviors. Many later approached him to admit they'd once done something similar and promised to be more mindful moving forward. Alex didn't stop there. He collaborated with travel bloggers, influencers, and educators to create online campaigns promoting responsible tourism. Together, they produced articles, videos, and infographics highlighting the do's and don'ts of visiting culturally significant sites. One campaign, titled "Respect Before Selfies," went viral, sparking conversations worldwide. It featured real stories from locals and travelers alike, emphasizing how small actions, like following guidelines or asking permission, could preserve the integrity of cherished landmarks. His efforts earned him recognition beyond what he ever imagined. Travel magazines interviewed him, calling him a voice for mindful exploration. Schools invited him to speak during cultural awareness weeks, and even some government tourism boards reached out for advice on educating visitors. Though Alex initially feared being labeled as the guy who tried to steal a sword, he came to embrace it. He realized his past wasn't something to hide. It was a powerful tool to drive change. Despite his growing influence, Alex remained humble. In every talk, he reminded his audience that everyone makes mistakes. What defines us isn't our worst moments, he'd say, but how we choose to grow from them. He often shared anecdotes from his journey, like the time a teenager approached him after a presentation to confess she climbed a sacred monument during a family vacation. Inspired by Alex's honesty, she vowed to educate herself about local customs before her next trip. Moments like these fueled Alex's determination to keep going. As his reputation grew, so did opportunities to contribute on a larger scale. Alex wrote a book detailing his experience and offering practical tips for ethical travel. Titled Lessons from a Mistake: How I Learned to Respect the World, the book became a bestseller among young adventurers. Critics praised its blend of personal storytelling and actionable advice, saying it struck the perfect balance between entertaining and educational. Through all this, Alex stayed grounded, reminding himself daily why he had started this journey. He knew he couldn't undo what happened at Buckingham Palace, but he could use it to leave a positive mark on the world. With each speech, article, and campaign, he hoped to inspire others to see travel not just as a chance for adventure, but as an opportunity to learn, connect, and honor the places and people they encountered along the way. And while he still carried the memory of that fateful day, it no longer weighed him down. It propelled him forward, shaping him into someone who truly understood the value of respect and responsibility. Years later, Alex's story had transformed from a cautionary tale into a legacy of growth and redemption. The young traveler who once stood frozen in front of a royal guard with his hand outstretched was now a respected advocate for cultural sensitivity and responsible tourism. His journey had taken him far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace, shaping not only his own life, but also the way others viewed their role as global citizens. Alex's efforts left an indelible mark on the travel community. Schools incorporated his book, Lessons from a Mistake, into their curriculums, teaching students about the importance of respecting traditions and boundaries when exploring new places. Tour operators began including sections in their pre-trip briefings based on Alex's campaigns, encouraging travelers to think critically about their impact on local cultures. Even social media influencers started tagging posts with hashtags like #RespectBeforeSelfies, spreading awareness to millions of followers worldwide. What began as one man's attempt to make amends had blossomed into a movement that resonated across generations and borders. Despite his success, Alex never lost sight of where it all began. On quiet evenings, he would sit by his desk, flipping through old photos or rereading letters he'd received from people inspired by his story. Some were heartfelt notes from teachers thanking him for sparking meaningful discussions in their classrooms. Others came from fellow travelers, sharing how his message had changed the way they approached their adventures. One letter, written by a young girl named Maya, stood out. "Because of you," she wrote, "I didn't climb that temple wall last summer. Instead, I talked to a guide and learned its history. Thank you for helping me see the world differently." Though Alex never returned to Buckingham Palace, he often found himself thinking about the guards, their discipline, their stoicism, and the silent lessons they embodied. He imagined them standing tall outside the palace gates, steadfast as ever, protecting not just a building but centuries of tradition and pride. In his mind, they represented something larger than themselves, the idea that respect is earned, not demanded, and that actions speak louder than words. Whenever he felt overwhelmed by doubts or fears, he reminded himself of their unwavering presence, a quiet source of inspiration. As time went on, Alex noticed subtle shifts in public behavior. Social media feeds that once brimmed with reckless stunts now featured thoughtful reflections on cultural experiences. Travelers posted pictures of themselves participating in local festivals, learning traditional crafts, or simply observing moments of beauty without interfering. These small changes filled Alex with hope, reminding him that progress doesn't happen overnight but grows steadily, one decision at a time. Eventually, Alex decided to take a step back from the spotlight. He continued writing and speaking occasionally, but he devoted more energy to mentoring young advocates eager to carry the torch. Sitting across from these wide-eyed individuals, he saw glimpses of his younger self, curious, passionate, and hungry to make a difference. He shared his story freely, offering advice and encouragement while urging them to find their own unique paths. In the end, Alex's greatest achievement wasn't fame or accolades. It was the ripple effect of his transformation. From classrooms to online forums, from bustling cities to remote villages, people embraced the values he championed: humility, empathy, and respect. And though he no longer stood center stage, his voice echoed in the choices of countless others who vowed to tread lightly and thoughtfully wherever their journeys took them. The memory of that day at Buckingham Palace remained etched in Alex's mind, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of how far he'd come. It taught him that mistakes, no matter how embarrassing or painful, can become stepping stones if approached with honesty and determination. As he looked toward the future, Alex knew one thing for certain: the world was a little kinder, a little wiser, and a lot more respectful because of the lessons he, and so many others, had chosen to learn.